everyone. We're excited to have BAYWORK Association joining us for this second session. So first, let me introduce the moderator for the session. Catherine Curtis is a workforce reliability manager at the San Francisco Public Utilities. She recently stepped down from her role as president of BAYWORK, but is still a BAYWORK board member. She has been involved with BAYWORK since its launch in 2009 and is the lead on the Digital Worker Initiative for BAYWORK. As Gustavo mentioned earlier, BAYWORK is a consortium of San Francisco Bay Area water and wastewater utilities that works together to ensure the reliable workforce needed to serve communities and protect the environment is available. This session will focus on some of the findings and recommendations from BAYWORK's Digital Workforce Initiative. Over to you, Catherine.
Thank you, Jim. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you may be. This is the Digital Worker session. I want to thank Jim Sariano for this opportunity to speak today and for our partnership with AWWA. Next. The initial groundwork for BAYWORK was laid in 2008 with a Water Research Foundation project on collaboration among utilities on topics of shared interest. BAYWORK's first open meeting was held in June of 2009. Our history, including all of our reports, videos of our events and presentations, webinars, and all of our videos are available to all of you and the utilities you work with on our website at baywork.org for free. Next. This is our BAYWORK roadmap we have used since the inception of BAYWORK. Everything we do falls into one of these four categories. Next. These are our mission critical categories that were discovered early in a survey with utilities and community colleges. We added engineer and collections worker, wastewater collections operator later. And these are our symbols for those occupations. Next. This is a view of our website, the home page and the careers page. Everything we have offered can be found here for free. The map highlights our member agencies. I invite you to investigate the site to see what is useful for you and the utilities you serve. Next. These are our BAYWORK basic principles. Our business model has always been by utilities for utilities. Everything we do is research-based, and our Digital Worker Initiative is a great example of that. Next. We didn't become active in the area of digital water until fairly recently. Cheryl Davis, who chaired BAYWORK from its inception until mid-2015, has been actively involved with both AWWA and the International Water Association for decades. She also managed the Water Treatment and Supply Division at the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission for many years. In 2018, she attended the IWA World Water Congress in Tokyo, which had a huge amount of programming on digital water, all dominated by software and hardware vendors and thought leaders. In her role as BAYWORK consultant, she urged us to address the serious utility workforce issues that were being overlooked. This made sense to us, and our Digital Water Initiative began in 2019. Because her work as the chair of an International Water Association specialist group, an IWA task group leader, and a fellow of IWA has given her an international perspective on these issues, this presentation combines BAYWORK's findings from the US and Canada with an international perspective on the issues. Cheryl will be providing an international perspective for all the categories in this presentation. And we have four major ones. Next. None of the magical thinking Cheryl heard at the Tokyo IWA event matched her own experience of trying to use the digital tools like SCADA and GIS and asset management systems as the manager of a water supply and treatment division that served over 2 million people in the San Francisco Bay Area. This is a picture of the water system for our area. In the Digital Worker Initiative, we have tried to move from the magical thinking to realistic expectations about what it takes for real people in the real world to use digital tools effectively. Next. This is the purpose of our Digital Worker Initiative. Next. Here are some of the activities over the last 3 years that we have done. We started in 2019 with research on digital tools, and we went to a workforce convening in Washington. In 2020, we facilitated a full-day workshop at the Utility Management Conference, where we learned about categories that people were interested in learning more about. Those categories we included in our digital worker white paper and the digital worker webinar that can be found on our website. Next. We had an advisory committee who provided input on experiences, questions, and lessons learned in relation.
Hola, buenos días a todos.
I'm not sure what that was. We had an advisory committee who provided input on experiences, questions, and lessons learned in relation to topic areas, participated in video conference sessions, and provided feedback on the white paper itself. We also had a couple of discussions on next steps that the advisory committee participated in, which can be found in the appendix section of the paper. Chad Weichel from AWWA was our partner and representative from AWWA, so this organization has a committed role in this body of work. Next. Here are the different chapters of the white paper. The ones that are bold and enlarged are the ones we will focus on today that specifically deal with workforce topics. Selection of digital tools, organizational culture, initial and ongoing training, and developing qualified candidates. At the end of each section, as a reminder, Cheryl Davis will give you an international perspective of the challenges and lessons learned and possible next steps. We will have a brief question and answer period after each section. Next. Now I would like to introduce you to Sharon Peters from EMA, who will talk with you about the selection of digital tools. Sharon?
Thank you, Catherine, and thanks to everyone for the opportunity to be here with you today. The successful selection and implementation of digital tools is a challenge for every industry, and there are plenty of stories out there about projects that have ended badly. There are a couple of specific reasons those challenges are particularly significant in the water industry. First, it's a relatively specialized market. There are a lot fewer potential buyers for most water-related tools than if we were talking about a product or service available to all consumers around the world. Second, there can potentially be high consequences if a tool does not perform, especially if a tool failure leads to drinking water quality issues or failing to manage wastewater appropriately. Third, the details matter in water, so a tool that almost gets it right can be more trouble than one that doesn't work at all. Next. I've been involved in the implementation of information technology systems at water utilities since about 2004. First, as an operations leader responsible for learning the new system myself and coaching others to learn it, and later as a project manager responsible for successful deployment of new systems. A key thing I learned through all of those experiences was that a lot of the challenges with digital tools and systems can be traced back to incomplete upfront planning. As technology consumers, we live in an ecosystem that constantly encourages us to want the newest version with the most functionality and to make the fastest possible purchasing decisions, not exactly compatible with careful planning. One of the most important questions to take your time considering is what problem are you trying to solve, or what specific improvements are you trying to make with technology? Do you have a laser focus on that? Or are you going to be distracted into pursuing nice to have features that you don't really need? And when I say you, there's a specific meaning to that. One of the most difficult challenges in working with utilities to implement digital tools is that there are always many different individuals and groups that have different ideas about what needs to be done. The more you can do to unify your internal players and align them around the purpose of a technology project, the more successful you will be. That means consulting with and thinking about the perspectives of users, of technology maintainers, and of people from other departments within the utility who use the data generated by the tools and for many different purposes. It sounds complicated, but it turns out to be way less effort to talk amongst yourselves and work out your differences of opinion internally than to try to do that when there are technology vendors or contractors or consultants in the room with you that are trying to meet project schedules and stay within a budget. A critical piece of the puzzle is to be clear about the capabilities of your organization to integrate and adapt to new systems. A digital tool can be a great tool and capable of achieving great things in a different context and still not be the right solution at the right time for your particular situation. Next. No matter what tools you choose, you need to plan for the impacts that introducing that tool will have on your current processes and systems. You can see the quote here provided by one of the contributors to the BAYWORK white paper. It is common for utilities to discover workflows that will be impacted when they're already in the middle of a software implementation project. That may seem odd to you, but many utilities have experienced so many
Perdóname, Fabio,
retirements.
habla Gregory. Justo antes de empezar, si me lo permiten, me voy a presentar porque voy a estar aquí escuchando y creo que es más para que todo el mundo sepa.
Lo siento
Entonces,
mucho.
yo soy
sorry, we're
Gregory
in the middle
Pelli,
of a
soy
presentation.
Water Specialist, especialista en proyectos de agua dentro de IFC, en el Grupo Banco Mundial. Y entonces trabajo con Fabio en esta iniciativa para...
Sorry.
I'm so sorry, Sharon.
No problem, no problem.
Go ahead.
That may seem odd to you, but many utilities have experienced so many retirements and so many people moving around to different roles that the team involved in a specific project may not know what kinds of impacts they could be having. Mapping those potential impacts out in an organized way before you start the project can help to prevent those kinds of unwelcome surprises. The last point I'll make about planning is to recommend that you work through what resources you will really need to ensure your people and your organization can make effective use of the new tools. Sometimes utilities use all of their resources and all of the funding available just to make the initial purchase and get it installed. The thinking is somehow, once we have it, our people will figure it out. And they may well be right. It's amazing what people can figure out when they need to and don't really have a choice. But at the same time, it can make the process much harder than it needs to be. Next slide, please. So assuming that you are successful in working through these various issues and creating a good plan, the journey isn't over. Your utility still needs to be able to follow through on the plan. Obstacles and constraints will come up during a project, and decisions will be made along the way that will either move you closer to or away from your plan. Some obstacles you may encounter include, will the utility will truly be able to follow through on its commitments? Will the utility be able to resolve the inevitable conflicts that will arise? Will you be able to manage change effectively? And finally, will you be able to achieve the benefits you were hoping for at the start? Next slide, please. So in conclusion, the lessons learned I would like to leave you with are: make sure you define the problems you're trying to solve, seek input from across the organization, and assess the preparedness of your staff to use any new tools you're planning to introduce. Next. Implement a structured process for mapping what already exists and consider the potential impacts of any new digital tool before you begin. Create a realistic business case that considers not only the cost of the tool, but the investments that will be needed for your organization to fully utilize the tool. Next.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Davis, and it's an honor to have an opportunity to speak with you today. As Catherine mentioned earlier, the BAYWORK white paper included an attachment 9 that gives a list of possible next steps that utilities might be able to take in order to help each other learn to use digital tools more effectively. One of these recommendations related to self-assessment. What we've observed is that utilities in the course of looking for new digital tools tend to focus a whole lot on the capacities of the tool they're evaluating, and unfortunately give very little attention to or overlook their own internal capacities. So for example, they may not look at what knowledge and skills are needed to use the tool, whether their staff have that knowledge and capacity, and also whether if that knowledge and skill is missing, whether they have the training capacity to address that. Similarly, Sharon talked about the need for utilities to analyze their existing workflows and systems. In truth, does the utility have the capacity to analyze those workflows? Do they know how to document those and assess those? Do they even know what systems they already have in place that may be relevant to this tool? So we had, as Catherine showed you, a just really very diverse and skilled advisory committee for this group and for the white paper project. And nobody on the group knew of any existing performance assessment, preparedness checklist, or how-to guide that would help utilities perform this task of self-analysis so that they would be better prepared to take on new projects. Our assessment is that while the answers to workforce-related questions might really vary from utility to utility, that all of us probably need to ask ourselves the same question, whether we're in North America or on a different continent. Thank you. Next slide.
I have a couple of questions for Sharon from that section. Sharon, for managing the implementation challenges, does it require any specialized human relationship management skills?
So I guess I would answer that to say that familiarity with and experience with change management principles is definitely an asset. The other piece that you will probably hear more about a little later on in the program is the importance of being able to connect knowledge, skills, and abilities of people to successful deployment of the tools. So someone who is also thinking about how those things come together to create competencies in the workplace is really helpful. But if you don't have access to those things, then there's still a long way you can go just based on the fact that what you can learn about your own people and their capabilities just from interacting with them every day.
Next question for you, Sharon. How long in advance do you suggest starting the planning process?
So that's a great question. And I think it really varies in terms of the complexity of dealing with the potential impacts that you're going to create, the number of different parties or groups within your organization that might be impacted as well. So how complex is the tool? How complex is the organization? I think I would And also, third factor to definitely consider is how long your procurement process is likely to take. So I would definitely want to start thinking about the planning at least about 6 months ahead of time. Give yourself enough time to at least do an initial assessment so that you're not rushed in order to try to meet whatever operational or organizational driven deadlines that you have.
Thank you, Sharon. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Joone Lopez, who is a general manager of a utility in Southern California and a subject matter expert on organizational culture, which is her topic. Joone?
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you to all the organizers for putting this together and for inviting me. And wherever you may be, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, you just don't know what time zone. So I'm very happy to talk about a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, which is the culture of an organization. Next slide, please. We all know that in any organization, the most important thing are the people, but sometimes we get caught up in the day-to-day and we lose sight of that, especially right now when so many people are working remotely. Some of the passing things that you notice, we don't see that all the time. So it's really important to remind ourselves that it's important to have the culture, the people who are willing to embrace and utilize this great, whatever technology or digital tools that we have. Because if you don't have people who are ready for that, who are wanting that, then no matter what great solutions you have, it's just going to sit there. I say it's like having a Ferrari and no one wants to drive it and no one knows how to drive it. It becomes just a waste. Next slide, please. And so how do we make sure that we have this culture? And I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that have worked in my organization in California. But the other thing that I realized, especially after 2020, is how much the world has changed. And as the world has changed, so have we, every single one of us. And what I started to notice as I brought staff back to the work site is there's this period of people getting to know one another again. It's like when you haven't seen an old friend for a long time, unless you're really close, there's that little bit of that awkward ramp up period. Well, same thing happens here. We've been apart for 18, some of us even longer months. And with all the changes around us, from the pandemic to the social protest to the natural disaster, there's a collective and individual sense of anxiety, grief, uncertainty, sense of loss, sense of nostalgia for how the world used to be that we can never get back today anymore. And so as all these feelings are swirling around, and on top of that, you have work, it's a whole different dynamic that is taking place. And as leaders and managers of organization, we have to evolve our leadership to address the changing world and the changing people. And so for me, the big word right now is feelings. Thinking about how people feel. It's not enough what the employees know. Yes, this is a good idea. Yes, your ideas are welcome. You know this, but they have to feel it. And they have to feel it in such a focused, powerful way that it overrides all these other anxiety and distraction that's occurring in their both personal and professional life. They're realizing how much they have changed, and it's a very difficult transition. So making sure that we take the time to understand that, to be self-aware and to support that will be more important than ever before when we talk about managing this culture, especially to, again, embrace something new, because change and newness is uncomfortable for many people. So imagine as people are feeling discomfort from all these different directions, now you add one more element. How will that be received? Next slide, please. So in times of great uncertainty, workplace can be a safe place, a place where people can feel that at least they have an idea of what is going on. So I always emphasize the importance of clarity, communication, and consistency. Be clear about what you know, be clear about what you're doing, be clear about what you don't know, and always communicate, which is a lot of listening to how people are feeling about whatever solutions that you're presenting, whatever innovation you're trying to embrace. Listen to what people are saying and speak to that. You can't say, well, I don't understand why you don't think this is a great idea. It makes perfect sense to you, but you have to make sure it makes sense to them. and the consistency, as Sharon talked about, making sure that you have a process to getting people engaged, to hear from people, to work out problems, and make sure that you're always consistent. Say what you mean what you say what you do, and do what you say. Those are all the things that employees are looking for. And when you can provide that assurance, that stability, and then you introduce innovation, people will be on board because they trust you. And that's what it boils down to, is trust is not a one and done. Trust is an ongoing thing. And especially as people are changing, we almost have to reestablish the trust. Our organization has been a top workplace for 4 years in a row, top workplace USA. I could just sit back and say, we're doing good. But no, we have to evolve, because if we're going to continue to innovate, if we're going to continue to excel, then we have to evolve how we do things, because what worked 18 months ago is not going to work today. And at the very bottom, HERO, our honesty, effort, respect, one team. That is one timeless component that has served our agency well as a foundational core value that no matter what change is going around us or within our organization, those three principles never change. And it has meant a lot to our organization. Next slide, please. In a very short amount of time, I'm not going to get into the two efforts that we did, but just to give you an idea, before pandemic, we did enterprise resource planning effort. We did it one way, but now, since before COVID and bridging over to sort of this 2021 era, which we're still in the woods with all the stuff that's happening, we are advancing meter infrastructure transformation, which is not just getting smart meter, but transforming how we do business, but making sure that we communicate clearly and we have clarity in what we're doing, and we continue to address how people are feeling about it. So again, we don't just approach innovation the same that we did in the past just because it was successful. We have to evolve based on the changing times. The final slide, please. So again, whatever organization you have, people are people. And that's the fundamental takeaway, is it's not about the sector. It's not even about generation. It's about people. And all of us have been affected and altered. So let's take a look at how we are feeling. Let's not be so quick to jump to the things that have worked in the past. Even remote working, let's think about that, because when you have people who are not English as a first language, who do not have the kind of the verbal skills or language skills, when you have people of color, women, a lot of these groups that are still trying to find their place in the leadership within the organization and the sectors, the more we have people remote and out of sight, that also has an impact. But this is where we learn. This is where we talk to one another and listen to the people of your organization. And when you get that temperature right, then innovation just comes with it, because people just see that as a way of improving the lives within the organization and also lives that the organization serves. So thank you so much for this opportunity, and look forward to hearing the rest of the presentations.
So the organizational culture issue is an international issue. Both in the US and internationally, many utilities have authoritarian, sluggish organizational cultures that, regardless of what they say or may even believe about their organizational culture, doesn't really support learning or change or collaboration. And you can't really effectively implement new digital tools without learning and change and collaboration. It's also true that within the US as well as internationally, many utilities either consciously or unconsciously limit the contributions of women and other culturally less valued groups. In attending International Water Association conferences, I've had many women come up to me and report that they feel that even though they have the training and the will and the capacity to contribute within their organization, they feel that their potential is overlooked and also underutilized. Most utilities don't have a realistic picture of their organizational culture, and also lack an understanding of the relationship between organizational culture and ability to implement new digital tools. For this reason, it would benefit our industry to have more webinars, more workshops, more publications that really clarify the direct relationship between organizational culture issues and the ability to effectively use digital tools. Next slide.
Okay, we have a couple of questions. Joone, this one is for you. Probably when we try to solve the problems of the institutions, we miss out on thinking about people, their relationships and motivations. Is there any guidance on that?
Sure. And you're right. If you don't focus on people, nothing else works. And it's not rocket science. What I like to do is I like to start with a small group. So talking to a small group about how people are doing overall within the organization, especially during challenging times. And how are people feeling? What are people saying? What do people need? Are we ready for this solution? Are we ready to talk about it? Or are people so overwhelmed that they don't have that capacity? I also communicate, and this is the clarity of communication, which is there are certain things I need to get done organizationally. And even if people are not ready for it, even if they're not feeling it, I have to do that as a manager, as a leader. But I do explain that I understand where they are, but this is something that we need to do. And it's not always about doing what is popular, but doing what is right. But acknowledging that goes a long way. So I think the more that you can talk to your employees, and I know some organizations are larger than others, but it's so powerful to hear from your leadership. And sometimes even if you have to do it by video, when they see the genuine and the care, and you can't fake that, unfortunately, because that's what people see right through, even remotely, is do you care? Are you listening? So I would recommend as having as many small groups, but also scaling that out. So organizationally, people are hearing the same thing and it's very consistent. And I think you need to communicate more. It's very conscientious communication. You can't over communicate these days because that's how you assure people. And so making sure that you have a very strategic, conscientious, frequent communication to talk about what's happening, to talk about what you're thinking as a leader, to invite feedback, and then also report back on that feedback gives the people a sense of calm and assurance that they know what's going on. Something's not going to be sprung on them. There are no surprises. I think that's the last thing that people need right now, especially social media. There's inundation of information and misinformation. Having that clarity at the workplace is something that we as managers can control, and we need to be very thoughtful on that. And so it's not just communicating when we need to, but this constant communication and over explaining and really being diligent about listening to the feedback, I think is what really allows us to weather through the current crisis, which I actually think is going to be with us for a while.
Thank you, Joone. Thank you, Cheryl. Next, I'd like to introduce Levi Fuller. Levi has been a wastewater operations superintendent and college instructor, and he's going to talk to us about initial and ongoing staff training. Levi?
Thank you, Catherine. Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a great day wherever you are. And thank you for the opportunity to speak with you for a few minutes today. Next slide, please. Some of the challenges using digital tools. It's not a one-time, one-size-fit-all effort. In over 30 years of operating water and recycle water utilities, I've operated at small utilities where people are jack of all trades, and the ability to have specialization is a challenge, particularly when focused on digital tools. And I've also operated at medium to large size facilities where specialization is helpful, unlike at small utilities. What is the age of the infrastructure in your utilities? How automated? And those things are going to impact your need for digital training. Training programs. I've had about a dozen years of experience teaching at community colleges. And so you have to look at what is the level of training you have within your utility on digital tools, and also my familiarity with the community college curriculum. Most of that curriculum and the textbooks focused on how to train students to operate the processes that you use to treat water and wastewater, but may not spend an adequate amount of time teaching the staff on how to use the digital tools that are associated with treating those processes in the modern era. Next slide, please. So research is needed on how best-in-class utilities and other industries provide staff training to make it more effectively. The use of online training materials, digital tools, video game-like learning tools, and mentoring from staff who have digital competencies. Some of the other training barriers are union agreements and organizational culture that has just been covered. Next slide, please. One of the things that you may want to consider when you engage on capital and operations and maintenance project is assess the digital competency of the staff you have available. And if you have staff who has digital competency, try to assign those folks to be a part of those capital and operations and maintenance projects. Those folks can serve both as your subject matter experts and power users for those digital tools. And then on an ongoing basis, those folks can also train their coworkers and advise management on the functionality of the digital tools, and also advise management on the need that staff needs to, the training needs and the training budget that is needed to train those staff members on an ongoing basis. Next slide, please.
As Catherine mentioned earlier, I was just shocked when I attended the 2018 World Water Congress in Tokyo, because after having decades of experience managing people who were performing water distribution and transmission and treatment functions using digital tools, I was surprised by the rosy glow that was put on how magical and easy all of these tools were to use. That certainly hadn't been my experience in our utility. So after hearing one of the presenters who was from a very reputable and profitable company that's involved with software and hardware present a list of all these wonderful tools, I asked whether his organization had a matrix of the knowledge and skills needed by staff in order to use those tools. So there was kind of a long pause, and he said, we don't have such a matrix. We actually don't know what knowledge and skills staff need in order to use these tools. And then later I ran into him in the hall and he said, and no, by the way, no one has ever even asked me that question before. So one of our difficulties as an industry is that we're not asking the right questions, and which alone is in itself enough to explain some of our difficulties. In many regions, it's very difficult to recruit people who have the digital competence that we need. And it is also difficult, once you may have managed to retain them, to keep them because salaries are low. Additionally, within many utilities, not only internationally, but definitely also within the US, internal training capacity is often really quite limited. Next slide. As mentioned, it's very difficult to get information on what tools people what skills people will really need, and to figure out what additional investment and training may be required. One thing that's important for utilities to do is to adapt their training to the current situation of the staff. It's very valuable to do a gap analysis on what they know now and what they would need to use the tool. It's also very valuable to develop a large suite of training tools. It could be a combination of mentoring, online training, field demonstrations. So we need to allow for the fact that people learn different ways in the first place, and also that training is not a one-time deal, that you will continue to need training for new staff members as they come on board. Next slide, please. One of the possible next steps is that we really need to provide more guidance to utilities on what skills and knowledge their staff will need to effectively use these tools. We also, as an industry, need to think about how to provide more assistance to utilities in developing their training programs. Next.
I have a question for Levi. Levi, do you have advice for utilities regarding making partners in the communities to help prepare people to work in the water sector?
Yes, well, here in the Bay Area, we actually have what's called the Bay Area Consortium for Water and Wastewater Education, which is about 25 utilities that recognized that we had a need to train operators of the future. And so what we've done is the utilities have funded a program where we've taken the curriculum from 3 Bay Area community colleges, and we've been able to teach those that curriculum not just at the community colleges, but we've also been able to teach that curriculum at some strategically located utilities within the Bay Area, and we've made that curriculum actually free for students who want to attend that. So if you want more information about that, you could send me an email, and I could provide you with the background to how we've done that in the Bay Area.
Great. How do we address the digital disconnect between the young and the older staff who are more resistant to adopting technology? Cheryl, do you want to take that one?
I'm going to use an idea that I got from Levi. And he and I have talked about the fact that one of his approaches has been, as projects are being developed that will have a digital component, that he will bring in some of the younger workers who are more interested and open to that, so that they can become the kind of super users who can then help teach older workers who may be more resistant or more nervous about trying to take on a skill that's not familiar to them. Also, when BAYWORK was earlier doing some of its survey with utilities within BAYWORK, I was very impressed with a very small utility that really focused on mentoring. Again, it was an issue of acknowledging that some people were going to learn things more quickly than others, and they would have very straightforward mentoring and devote themselves to spending enough time with people to give them a chance to learn. And then similarly, I recently talked to an engineer. They had developed some online training programs, but again, they were supplementing that with field demonstrations. And then if the online training tool didn't work effectively, they didn't ask the staff person, what's wrong with you? They brought it back to themselves and said, what do we need to do better to bring this information to you? So I think that the combination of both commitment and flexibility and training is necessary in order for us to get over that hurdle, which in fact does exist.
Well, Levi, you were involved in that answer, even though you didn't speak it. Thank you, Levi, and thank you, Cheryl. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Steve Currie. Steve is our current BAYWORK Vice President. He also works for East Bay Municipal Water District in Oakland in their Diversity and Inclusion Office, and he's going to talk to us today about qualified candidates. Steve?
Thank you, Catherine. Hi, everyone. As Catherine said, I'm Steve Currie from the East Bay MUD Diversity and Inclusion Office. My focus is workforce development. That includes targeted recruitment, internship and trainee programs, and education and community partnerships. I've been at East Bay MUD for 3.5 years, 5 years at SFPUC across the Bay. Before that, working closely with Catherine, and 7 years working through BAYWORK, focused primarily on candidate development and outreach, now serving in the capacity of Vice President. Overall, I have 20 years of workforce development experience in the San Francisco Bay Area. But enough about me. Moving on to the next slide. There's a couple of notable challenges around candidate development for the digital workforce. First, the common perceptions about the required knowledge, skills, and abilities for mission critical workers is generally outdated. The need for modern digital technology and technical maintenance skills is not well understood by most. The typical bureaucratic systems in most public water and wastewater agencies may not be equipped or structured to keep up with the pace of technological change. Secondly, local education institutions and other training resources in the community may not be set up to train students for these critical skills. If you're not proactively connecting with local training providers in your community, then who is? Anybody? Other employers? Other parallel industries? Are their needs the same as yours? Or maybe your local education and training institutions are using outdated curriculum without any kind of employer input. The bottom line is you can't expect your local training programs to inherently understand and reflect your current reality or your current technology needs in their training. You have to be proactive. Next slide. The lessons learned are very simple. Utilities must support technical training by providing on-site hands-on learning opportunities. This includes internships, apprenticeships, and other trainee programs. We found the best way to maximize these efforts is to leverage our local community colleges and local community-based nonprofit agencies who provide job training, partner with regional water, wastewater agencies and other sister agencies and industry employer groups. Each agency must find an approach or model that works for their specific circumstances. Figure out what's realistic for your agency's size, capacity, geographic proximity to your community college or other community partners. We've learned, yes, you have to make a commitment of staffing and resources. Yes, you have to put in the work to get buy-in from internal and external stakeholders, but these efforts and investments do pay off. Next slide. And we're not done learning. I want to introduce JVS, Jewish Vocational Services. It's a local nonprofit workforce organization that has been a critical partner to BAYWORK and the local water wastewater agencies in the San Francisco. We're really fortunate to have one of the premier workforce agencies in the region take an interest in our industry and have an invested interest in helping us build our talent pipeline. They've worked with us closely over the past 5+ years to help us understand and actively address our own workforce needs and gaps. As Greek philosopher Socrates said, to know thyself is the beginning of wisdom. Through the digital competency analysis project, we're asking some important questions about the skills our agencies need. 1, what type of digital tools do workers in different job categories need to be able to use? 2, What core reading, math, science, and analytical skills do they need in order to use the tools? 3, what kind of training does the utility need to be prepared to offer directly? And finally, what training is available in the community on both core skills and tool-specific information? Through this project, we're looking forward to getting a clear understanding of our needs as an industry, so we can communicate that better to our internal and external stakeholders and partners. Next slide. BAYWORK is also supporting the development of apprenticeship, internship, and pre-apprenticeship programs for water sector agencies across the regional Bay Area. The current focus is strengthening the career pathway for instrument techs, also known as electronic maintenance techs. The more agencies that support and adopt these kinds of training programs, and the better alignment we have across these programs, the stronger the overall talent pipeline for our industry. Again, by combining classroom with on-the-job training, new candidates can learn the full range of digital skills needed in their trade. Next, I'll turn it over to Cheryl to discuss the candidate development from the international perspective.
The skills that are required for operation and maintenance of digital tools may not be taught by any organization in the area that's served by a specific utility. Within the Bay Area, we have community colleges and universities and unions and NGOs and other educational resources, and even we struggle with finding prepared candidates in key areas. As an example, recently I was talking with a wastewater treatment operator, and as we know, there's been a lot of advertisement, and there's a validity to about it, the wonderfulness of having all the new kind of sensing devices. And he was talking about their need to measure the ammonia that they were putting into receiving waters, into shallow waters. He talked about the fact that they had no trouble acquiring sensors that worked perfectly on day one, but that they seemed to go out of calibration very quickly, and that the wastewater treatment operators didn't really have the skills to fix them when they went off. And we, even within the Bay Area, have a difficulty finding enough instrument techs to help us keep all of those sensing devices and communication devices up to par. So this challenge is necessarily, of course, even worse in areas where the educational institutions may be limited and they may not have the support of NGOs or unions or other kind of organizations that we have available to help us here. This can be exacerbated because, as I've heard many times from people attending International Water Association conferences, the pay scales of their utilities are so low that it's difficult to attract people in the first place. And after they acquire skills, they can easily be sucked up into other parts of the economy that have better salaries. Next slide. So as we're trying to do here, it's worthwhile to take time to get a clearer picture of what skills are used to operate specific tools, and also the kind of capabilities that are necessary in order to maintain sensing devices. One thing that's important, and again, at the US and internationally, is to provide support to utilities in upgrading their job descriptions and their salary levels so that they can attract and keep qualified staff. And as Steve also mentioned, it's important for utilities to strengthen their relationships with educational institutions and really to become themselves part of the learning community. This is just a phenomenal challenge, especially for utilities that are already struggling to perform their basic functions, but it's an investment in long-term capability that can be very important. Next slide.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Cheryl. I don't see any questions entered for you, so I will move forward in the presentation. What you see on the screen is our links to our BAYWORK white paper and our BAYWORK white paper webinar that can be found on our BAYWORK website. They're available to you for free. And do keep in mind that there is that appendix number 9 that has possible next steps for collaboration. And that's internationally, nationally, regionally, agency to agency. So you might find some good concepts in there for your agencies to collaborate together. Next slide. All of the people that have presented to you today have had a slide with their email and their contact information, except for Cheryl and I. So I wanted to provide you the contact for us. Feel free to email us about any question you may have about the white paper or the webinar or anything in this body of work. And we'll be happy to answer your questions. That concludes our presentation for today. I'd like to thank again AWWA and Jim and the opportunity for us to talk about the workforce needs for digital workers. Thank you.